Okay, a controversial video for you. Let's talk about why these Trump tariffs are good for crypto. I know that sounds crazy and everyone's probably telling you that the market's freaking out and these tariffs are terrible. Well, look, we're going to break down exactly why I think these are going to be good in the long term. And ultimately, this right now is a shakeout because they want your crypto and they don't want to pay full retail price for it. All of that in this video. This one is a good one. So if you enjoy this type of content, make sure you smash that like button and hit that subscribe button. And with that being said, let's get into this video. So it's been a rough all day in the cryptocurrency markets. Bitcoin dropping down to 97,000, down about 3.5%, nearly 6% on the week. And the total market cap down to 3.19 trillion, 6%. Everywhere you look, everything's red. The reality here is that there has been a huge sell-off, not only from the institutions, but retail has been dumping at their bags like you wouldn't believe. What an opportunity if you are still holding some capital. But more importantly here, understand why would retail be selling and pretty much the longer term holders are still holding. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that in this video. So ultimately, why? Well, Bitcoin crashing to 97,000 around the global financial market and widespread decline on the position after Donald Trump announced a 10% tariff on China and 25% tax on Mexico and Canada starting February the 1st. Now, obviously that was met with counter tariffs, if you like, Canada specifically coming out and saying that they were going to put 25% back on the US. But this is where it gets pretty interesting. You have to kind of break some of these things down. If you look at the US trade with Mexico and Canada and China, the reality here is there is a huge amount of imports into the US, and actually the rest of the world imports US products. So the fact of the tariffs here is they are only going to impact one people, and that is the people that ultimately are putting the tariffs on it. Mexico, Canada, and China will all significantly be benefited by the fact that these US tariffs are going to go on. In fact, the US, it's something like 5% of their product, their GDP is imported. The rest is a huge amount. Look at this. For Mexico particularly, hence why they haven't said anything. But Canada, well, they're playing chicken, and they're probably playing chicken with the wrong person because actually they import, I think, 20% of their goods from the US. So ultimately, this is going to be a significant pain for the Canadian markets. And in fact, there is a narrative as to why tariffs can be good for the US economy. And this fundamentally is they simply have most of it homegrown. They manufacture a lot in the US. They make sure that a lot of their product is built in the US, and ultimately build in the US and you don't get any taxes. This is what Trump talked about. Whereas actually for things like China and Canada, they import a lot from the US. They will all have massive problems as it's going to impact the Canadian and ultimately the Mexican people. The US can probably just do it in home. Very interesting. We talked about this yesterday around Colombia, where people just drink different coffee. Kind of wild to think about. But there is more to this than meets the eye. And this is fundamentally why we think that Bitcoin could head up to a further high. And a lot of it has to do with this, which is longer term holders are holding on to their bags. In fact, we're seeing the midterm 1 to 12 months holding on as well. The people selling right now are the traders, the short term holders, basically anyone with crypto less than a month. Well, if you go back a month ago and you look at where we were in terms of price, these are the people that bought in high that are now dumping their bags. What, again, an opportunity this could be for many of those people that have capital on the sides. The early investor, the last in, are ultimately selling and they're the first out. Dumping the price, we've seen real concern in the market. But like I said, those steadfast ones holding crypto for more than a year, you and I were absolutely dialed in for what we think is going to be a big push to the upside. But I want to double back on this, why this is important and ultimately why tariffs are going to push the price of Bitcoin up. Because we know the US market fundamentally moves the price of Bitcoin, whether that's the SEC, whether that's the uptake of ETFs. And this is where it gets interesting. So why are the Trump tariffs good for the US economy? They will ultimately put more money into the US economy. Over the past year or 2 years, in fact, since 2023, over 1 billion packages from China entered under a very interesting loophole known as the de minimis rule, which ultimately means that any product or anything valued under the value of $800 is basically duty-free, tax-free, largely uninspected. It's a loophole that has been abused, and I'm sure Trump would say the same. Temu, Shein, you'll have heard of these places, ultimately putting through these packages, 1 billion packages under that value of $800, all these lower quality Chinese imports that you see. Well, these will now have a tax. Guess what happens to the tariff? It takes it over the $800 mark. Therefore, it has now taxes, all of which fundamentally goes back into the US economy. Very, very interesting indeed. And actually, some people say that Trump's doing it on purpose. The reality is that is not the case. And he's going to close this loophole down. He's going to impose a significant tariff on them, putting more money on these, stopping basically free trade going into the US with the money going back to the original customer. Why is this important? Well, ultimately, this is going to put more money back into the US people's hands, which ultimately therefore means that they are more interested in risk assets. We were talking about this on my live stream. Inflation may go up a little bit, but while inflation goes up, your tax will probably come down, particularly income tax and those taxes around, maybe even state taxes. That ultimately puts money back into the consumer's hands. And when people have more money, what happens to risk markets? Risk markets go up. So these tariffs that a lot of people seems to be freaking out, retail's freaking out and selling all their risk assets because they think this huge trade war is going to come. The reality is, simply put, Canada and probably China can't afford to do it. And the fact that so much is grown in the US, so much is manufactured in the US, the percentages are so wildly different. It's probably only going to be one winner here, and it's probably the US. And fundamentally, therefore, risk assets such as Bitcoin will ultimately be the long-term winner on this. Remember, those with years of experience, those with years of holding crypto, they're still holding. Let me know what you think of all of this in the comments down below. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. But look out, tariffs, well, they're pretty good for Bitcoin. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.